and I knew that I never had to worry about finding another job after Revolution. Like, just don't get fired. That was the goal. Marty, don't you dare get fired, because this liquid in this can with this band of pranksters at the helm of this company are going to take you wherever you want to go.
Cheers.
You've stumbled on into the Tap Takeover podcast.
All right, we're back with Tap Takeover podcast. This is Marty Scott, barrel manager at Revolution Brewing. I'm here with 5 other dudes. Let's talk about Revolution. Everybody introduce yourselves, put some voices with the names.
Jesus.
Andy here.
Aaron.
This is Alex.
This is Jim.
So we're continuing our live tasting that we started a couple weeks ago, if you're listening live to the program. We've been having a lot of fun talking with you guys about just, your brewery processes, your aging, your barrel aging. We're having a lot of fun here right now. We'd like to get back into this live tasting that we're doing. So we tried 2 versions of the Deth Tar last time we met, and we're going to continue with that right now with the Deth By Currants or Deth By Currants. Marty, what's the pronunciation?
Choose your poison. They're both correct.
So what can we expect? Tell our listeners what kind of flavors they can expect by this Deth By Currants, and tell me how you think this year's version might have done compared to that Deth By Cherries last year.
Okay, yeah. So the Deth By Currant is by no means a replacement for Deth By Cherries. 2 very different processes, 2 different end games. It's not simply just fruiting a barrel-aged imperial stout. So last year, not everybody, but enough people, myself included, really liked Deth By Cherries, and that was all about the base beer complemented subtly with tart cherry character. The Deth By Currants this year is a slightly different process, and we're focusing on the tartness. So there is some fruit character there, but what people are going to notice first is that this beer is a tart beer. It's by no means a sour beer. The pH is a little bit lower. It's, I guess, in the territory of some of the more mild sour beers in existence. This is all about just kind of really switching it up as much as we can while still staying true to the base beer. We found black currants offer a marked acidity pickup as opposed to something like tart cherries even, which, the best chefs in the world talk about fat, acid, heat, and a number of other metrics. We're really getting into the acid game with this beer, and it finishes a little bit quicker. It's a lot more drinkable. It's the same ABV, but that acidity really kind of livens up everything. And again, this was a beer that we allowed our consumers to vote on last year. We had a number of fruited options, and we said, whatever you guys vote on, or whatever you gals vote on, is pretty much going to be what we make as the fruited variant of this barrel-aged stout next year. We stuck by a word and we did it. So the acid just kind of livens everything up. It finishes faster. It's a completely unique experience to Deth Tar while not losing anything that you get from this year's Deth Tar.
And all your fruiting is done after aging, right? You wouldn't throw a low pH beer into a barrel, right?
In this case, yes, it actually is. We added the fruit to the barrels to allow that fruit to age, mature, and we hate this word, oxidize, that's happening naturally in the barrels. We try to limit and control it as much as possible, or as much as practical, but we found with the cherry, the way we employ the cherry, we want that super fresh after aging. With the currant and the acid and everything you get from that, we wanted to add it to the barrel and allow that to age with the beer so that it wouldn't be clunky, overly tart, like saccharine sweet. We wanted to give this product an opportunity to age with the beer, and that's exactly how we executed it prior to our death match, where we allowed our consumers to vote on a number of fruited variants.
And still carry that barrel character, right? So one of the characteristics that I have noticed in all of the Revolution beers is that these are vehicles for the barrel. Like tacos and burritos are just vehicles for hot sauce. All Revolution beers are vehicles for that barrel character. I mean, is that really something you, Marty, focus on?
Absolutely. I've been kicked off of committees for my hell-bent adherence to focusing on barrels and oak and age and blending. And, we put it into a barrel on purpose. It's not easy and it's not cheap. It's time-consuming. It uses a lot of labor. It consumes a lot of space in our brewery footprint to execute these beers. And, they go into a barrel and you better taste that barrel. Otherwise, it's a complete waste of money and time, and it's just a marketing ploy at that point. And we want to do what we can, not to set ourselves apart, but just to do the most faithful execution of these oak-aged beers that we possibly can. And the more adjuncts you throw at it and the more gimmicks you throw at it, the more that tends to get lost. So even when we do throw a ton of coffee at something or a ton of fruit at something, a la Code Switch from last month in the October release, it's still about the barrel. Otherwise, it's a complete waste of time. A lot of people are putting beer into barrels, and you don't get a ton of barrel character. We want the barrel character. We want oak, spirit character. We want age. We want that subtle, controlled, slow, tasteful oxidation. And more and more we're seeing that people are responding to it and saying, I can get a pastry stout from any damn brewery in the nation for the most part, but we don't want to be that brewery. We want the identity of this program to be about the oak, the barrel, the blending, the traditional methods, all that boring stuff that create characteristics in these beers that you simply cannot achieve quickly by adding adjunct.
So, Jesus, Andy, and Aaron, I'm going to ask you specifically, what are you getting out of this? Are you getting those very traditional oaked flavors? What are you getting out of the Deth By Currants here?
I am getting that, but it's really, for me, I get the tartness. I think it's too much for me. It's definitely a unique flavor for a beer, but for me, it is well balanced, but I think it's too tart. The tartness is just too much for me.
For me, it is quite tart, but I actually enjoy that tartness in it. You get those dark fruit, raisiny characteristics for me. So it's almost like a plum mixed with a raisin, but boozy.
That's kind of how I feel about it. There is a tart character, but I feel like the barrel balances it out extremely well. And I think that's the whole purpose of why the team this year went with the currants in the barrel as opposed to post-barrel. It was kind of, we wanted that tart character to an aspect, but I don't think it's overly tart, in my opinion. I think there's a really great balance between tartness and barrel character that really balances out for me personally.
It melds very well. It just melds.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that barrel really adds something. It adds a bit of vanilla to the currant. It gives it kind of a sundae kind of flavor, like a sundae served in a wooden bowl, almost. It's really, really nice. I'm enjoying the hell out of this one. Jim, any final thoughts on this beer?
I would say I really enjoyed the tartness, and that was kind of what drove my questions, because it seemed to be in barrel fermentation with the tartness. Rather than a post-adjunct.
And that's very rare. Most people would just add something at the very end, after it's been in the barrel.
Because it's super easy. Anyone could brew a base beer and then adjunct the hell out of it afterwards.
Adding something into the barrel, that's a whole different
especially
animal.
for the year or two that Revolution does. But let's move on to our next beer.
Well, I think let's do a little side-by-side with the VSOJ and the Code Switch. All right, so Jesus, I'm going to throw it to you. Which do you have a favorite between the two that you have in front of you right here?
Well, for me, I like VSOJ because I enjoy. It reminds me of port wines. That's what I like about it. That raisiny kind of like very thick. The mouth feels great. I know Andy talks about that too. For me, I just love that kind of flavor. It reminds me of a port wine. That's why I like this. The other one, a little bit too sweet for me.
That's a fantastic observation, Jesus, in that this really, the VSOJ is very port-like in its character with that deep barrel, the deep caramel, raisiny flavors. That's a great description of it.
For me, the VSOJ was absolutely fantastic. I've had it a couple times before since you released it last month, and it's fantastic. I actually pull like toffee and like caramel flavors out of there, even though you said there's none of those notes in there from the malts. It's all barrel, and it's fantastic. The Code Switch is interesting. I mean, it's more sweet than I like, but it's still something I can drink pretty easily.
What's interesting about what I've heard about Code Switch is people ding it for being sweet, and sweetness is a measure of the amount of sugar in the beer. This is the driest barrel-aged beer we've ever produced. What sets it apart is the aggressive nature of the fruit character. We added a ton of fruit, and even after that fruit, the sugar concentration is still lower than any other barrel-aged beer we have ever produced to date. It is quite dry, it is very aggressively fruity, but people taste fruit, they smell fruit, they see purple drink, and they think, oh, this is going to be sweet. And your palate is not wrong, but to call it sweet is kind of a misnomer. It's quite dry, it's less than 3% sugar, whereas VSOJ is just over 9% sugar. It's super dry, exceedingly fruity, and it's a double barrel aged. We don't call it double barrel aged. The first round of barrels wound up leaking, so we had to rescue it with a second round of fresher barrels. It only stayed in the first barrel for a couple of weeks, so we don't really call it double barrel aged, but it is in fact seen 2 different barrels. It's been aged for a year, and it's super aggressively fruited. So the critiques that I hear about this beer, when I hear critiques about them, is that it's too sweet. And that just tickles me, and I love hearing that, because it's a great opportunity to educate ourselves about what we're tasting. And it's not in fact sweet. If you dropped a hydrometer in this thing, it would clang to the bottom of the graduated cylinder in a heartbeat. But it's just so fruity, and you look at that purple color and you think, well, this is going to be a fruit bomb. And it is a fruit bomb, but a dry fruit bomb.
Well, people are probably getting that sweetness from their smell. The nose on that, I mean, 70% of what we taste is from what we smell. So that's probably where that sweetness is coming from, right?
And the first drink is done with the eyes, yeah. So you see purple drink and you think purple drink, and that's what you expect. And the ridiculous fruit character in this beer just kind of reaffirms that, but it's actually an error. It's quite a dry beer. It's an enigma wrapped in a riddle, and yada yada yada. It was just a fun beer, and that speaks to why we called it Code Switch. This is a total departure for what the Deepwood program is about. And again, this is a collaboration with our friends at Sun King in Indianapolis. And it was actually, the project was green-lighted at the Canvitational last year. We did another collaboration with them called 00 Session, which they brewed. It was a session IPA. And we did Code Switch over here, aged it for a year. I wasn't actually party to the discussion, or I never would have said yes to the first round of barrels that they had suggested, which we actually had to rescue the beer from. Yeah, Code Switch is totally unique. I've never tasted anything like it. I really like it, but I definitely understand where it would be kind of a divisive beer. But I think the more people know about it before they get into it, the more likely they're going to be to enjoy the beer, at the very least finish the beer, and not pan it. But yeah, it's a crazy beer for sure.
Speaking of divisiveness, I'm going to have to break with Jesus and Andy. I really enjoyed this. I'll tell you what, blackberries are my favorite fruit, my favorite berry, one of my favorite flavors in all of beers. And this one is showcasing it really nicely. I think the dryness that you were talking about really accentuates that berry flavor. It lets it stand out. Like, the berries speak for themselves because they're almost muted a little bit, so they're a little more understated. I like this beer quite a bit. And I think it's almost an unfair comparison. We sat down to do a comparison between this VSOJ and the Code Switch. It's almost unfair because, like you said, you have one that's fruited and very dry, and then the other which is dry but also sweet. It's a weird comparison. I tend to enjoy the VSOJ better, but I really do enjoy that Code Switch as well. Jim, where do you come down on these two?
I'm actually, after you said how dry the Code Switch is, it really then clicks in how dry it is. Like, my brain wants to fill in that residual sugar that is not there because of what I'm seeing. Well, once you're told, hey, this is actually quite dry, there's no residual sugar, then it becomes a very dry beer with a lot of barrel and a touch of fruit on the end. Again, I think that's where education comes into play, where you want to give it the Lizard of Kaz kind of treatment, but it's not.
Yeah, I think we could have called this beer Gaslight, and it would have been every bit, if not more, apt. But yeah, It's crazy dry. Again, this is the driest beer the Deepwood program has ever produced. And we're tasting it next to VSOJ, which is the sweetest beer the Deepwood program has ever produced. And, it's stylistically, barrel-aged English barley wine ought to be a little bit sweet. But what we're really tasting with the VSOJ is all about oak, thyme, malt, patience. That's the tagline, is oak, malt, and patience. And it's a cuvee of a couple of different batches at a couple of different ages. One age is 2 years, the other age is 3 years. Wow. So there's a ton going on here with the VSOJ. The code switch or gaslight is, it's crazy in that it's purple, but it's so dry, and everybody just expects it to be quite sweet. And you're not wrong. Your palates aren't wrong. If you don't enjoy the beer, you don't enjoy the beer. We knew this was going to be kind of a toss-up. You were either going to really enjoy it or you were going to not enjoy it very much at all. And that's okay. If you don't enjoy the code switch, I'm sorry. But we've got 9 other cans of Deepwood beers that we're going to be releasing this year to include the VSOJ, and that's fine.
So we've been talking about barrel aging a lot because, well, frankly, you guys are doing some of the best in Chicago, some of the best in the Midwest, some of the best in the nation. Coming up here in mid-November is the Festival of Barrel Aged Beers, the FOBAB, the premier barrel aging festival in the U.S. What have you guys got that you're going to showcase there at FOBAB?
I'm offhand, I forget what Will Turner and John Palos or Jumpy are doing over at the Brew Pub. Aaron, can you remind us?
So we have the opportunity, because we have 2 facilities, we are able to submit 2 beers per facility. So we have 2 beers from Kedzie that we submit and 2 beers from the Brew Pub that we submit. So from the Brew Pub side, we are actually submitting our Filibuster, which is our barrel-aged wheat wine that we have as one of our beers. And then our second beer that we are submitting this year that I am supremely excited for, we do what's called Enormogene, which is an imperial version of Eugene. And then this specific version, Marty talked about how we were doing a one-off that was kind of a Eugene aged in barrels and imperialized. So this beer is actually our imperial Eugene, we refer to as Hugene. This is a brew of Hugene, is normally aged in Heaven Hill barrels, but for the batch that we are submitting to FOBAB was aged in few whiskey barrels. We actually aged this in small batch, few whiskey barrels for close to 2 years, and the end result that came out is quite possibly one of the best barrel-aged beers we have ever released out of the brew pub. We immediately knew that we wanted to submit this beer to FOBAB this year, because even aside from the excellence that we get from Enormogene in Heaven Hill barrels, the beer that we got out of these few whiskey barrels was unreal and unmatched. That is the second beer that we're releasing from the brew pub, at least.
And from the Kedzie facility, we'll be submitting good old Straight Jacket and good old Rye Way to Heaven, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Nothing like the classics. All right, so as we wrap up here, we're going to head into our last part. We got to talk about the hoppy beers. You guys actually make some good hoppy beers, right?
Yeah, we didn't talk about that, did we?
Not really.
Well, yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking about the barrel-aged beers, and that's because we're in the thick of the barrel-aged beer season. But on the second part, we really do want to focus in on some of the beers that bring the people coming back for more, the masses, the beers for the masses. I remember the very first time a friend of mine brought a beer to a New Year's Eve party, and he brought the very first Anti-Hero that I'd ever tried. And it had the click-on, the six-pack click-on, which was brand new. I'd never seen that before. It was the branding on the can was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. And I was like, holy man, you're telling me an IPA can come in a cool-ass can that I'm going to go back for. I'm going to see that on the shelf and immediately go back for. And it can taste like this. This was at the point when the West Coast hops were the very biggest, best thing. Can you guys talk about the Anti-Hero? What did it mean for the brand? What did it mean for Revolution? And if you can touch on what it means going forward, what you guys like to do with the Anti-Hero series?
It's no secret. Anti-Hero keeps the lights on. It's roughly half of our total production. It has been since we started the 2012 brewery at Kedzie. It was one of the OG beers we had on at the brew pub. It was never meant to be a flagship. It was just an IPA. We needed an American IPA. The master, Jim Seaback, created this IPA. It's malt-focused, but hop-accented. It's all about the pale ale malt, the Carapils, the red wheat, the Simpson's Golden Naked Oats, the Weirmann Munich 1 malt. That's the malt bill for Anti-Hero. I won't give you the exact proportions, but there's a lot going on the malt side.
Giving away secrets.
Oh, feel free to, though, give us
it's all about process. Process. So unless you've got our equipment, we're pretty comfortable releasing this information.
Can't recreate that.
No. But it's malt-forward IPA that we throw a bunch of our favorite classic hops at. It's not about these new, sometimes grungy American hops. It's about the classics, but we didn't want to make something that was uber dry with no body and a million IBUs. We wanted to have, not to be sexist or chauvinistic, what we refer to as a gentlemanly beer that's approachable and that you can have more than a couple of. You can have it on its own or with food, but it's about malt and about the way it finishes, and then it's still bitter enough to be a fuck off American IPA. And we're using some Cascade. A lot of Centennial is the primary hop in the dry hop there, and we rotate. Sometimes we can't get enough of some of our favorite hops through contracting. I'd like to think that we protect our hop contracts to make sure that we can keep making Anti-Hero, but hops change year to year. Cascade crops are different, Centennial crops are different, Citra, Crystal, all these hops change year to year for the most part. So we don't just stick to a recipe, we stick to a group of characteristics that we're going for. Chinook is another one that's in there. It's certainly a piney, citrusy, floral hop profile, but all this stuff is built on malt and low oxygen and quality. And we're still figuring out how to make Anti-Hero better. We get thrown curveballs when we get new hop crops delivered to us. I'd say it's the hardest beer that we brew because we have the highest standard for that beer as far as the need to have it be consistent in a world where our ingredients are wildly inconsistent.
Well, I'll tell you what, speaking of hops changing, you guys have changed the hops quite a bit. You guys have this new Citra Hero series where you guys are doing kind of is it a one hop that you guys are doing in each beer, or are you guys kind of doing the base beer with accentuating one more hop? But you guys have got a lot of these different one-off series.
Yeah, the Hero series has been a lot of fun. It allows us to explore focusing on single hops or a group of hops that have very similar characteristics. Every single one of the Hero series beers is a unique beer. We do not recycle a malt bill from any of these beers to the next. Typically they are drier so that it's not so malt focused like Anti-Hero is, but they have different colors, they have slightly different finishing gravities. Typically they're drier, or almost exclusively I should say, they're drier than Anti-Hero. Almost exclusively they're more bitter than Anti-Hero, and they're more aggressively dry hopped. And we're really trying to focus on kind of like consumer education, if you will, on like this is what this hop tastes like, this is what these hops or these classifications of hops smell and taste like. And it's been a lot of fun picking hops that we don't necessarily like as a brew team and trying to make a Revolution beer with those hops. We've really challenged ourselves. Most of the time we just want to drink Pilsner in Fist City, but when we show up to work, it's about working to make these hops play with the beer the way that Revolution wants our beers to come across. So it gives us an opportunity not just to be an Anti-Hero factory, and we'd be frankly pretty content being an Anti-Hero factory.
You'd be very
we love that beer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's what keeps the lights on. It's why we all have health insurance and 401k. These other single hop or kind of unique hop blends has been a chance to grow as technicians, as craftsmen, as scientists.
I want to actually piggyback on, talked about Alex's first introduction to your brewery and the League of Heroes. Let's talk about the branding. It's a really cool comic book feel to it. The cans are amazing. They definitely pop at you when you're in the stores.
Even the way that you guys release them in the series that you guys do, it's like a certain comic book series. There's Series 1, Series 2, Series 3.
Yeah, I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that? You were here from the very beginning. When did that start? When did that look start?
Yes, the designers at Mighty Few is their, I don't know if they're a real company, but there are at least two creative geniuses over there at Mighty Few Designs, or whatever the company name is, who have done all of our can designs. And the first time we saw one of their cans, we were still just a brew pub. We had draft-only beer, and we had this pie-in-the-sky idea of someday soon we might have a packaging brewery. And when that time comes, we don't want to produce beer and then try to find a design for it. We needed a design ahead of time. Our consumers and the staff is drinking a lot of Anti-Hero. I think Anti-Hero might be, the way forward. This might be a future flagship. And when we saw the first mock-up of the original can, which is very, very similar to the can as it exists now, we realized that this liquid under the helm of Jim Seaback with this can design is going to communicate so beautifully and so flawlessly what the consumer can expect from the liquid on the inside of the can. And I knew that I never had to worry about finding another job after Revolution. Just don't get fired. That was the goal. Marty, don't you dare get fired, because this liquid in this can with this band of pranksters at the helm of this company are going to take you wherever you want to go. Anti-Hero is now the most ubiquitous. It sounds like such a dirty word, ubiquitous, for a craft product. But we're everywhere. It's the number one IPA in the state of Illinois, and we've got a couple of prolific IPA producers here in the city with us. But as soon as we saw that can, we knew that, there's no question. We're definitely going places. This is not just us blowing smoke up our own backsides. We're going to do something. We're about to experience some shit over the next couple of years, and we certainly have. Making the Hop General on the Anti-Hero IPA can kind of the centerpiece, not only as a flagship, but as an anchor for the rest of the series, allowed us to tie in that beautiful branding to other unique IPAs or single hop IPAs. The reception has been very, very positive. We're able to, we don't have to think, what beer are we going to make next? It's like, how many different, unique, cool single hop IPAs can we make and release?
We found out that in the past you thought that nerds were in the minority. We now know that nerds are literally in the majority. And with the Hero series, it basically set the standard of most people are nerds that are into kind of that sci-fi comic world, and we can have this series that kind of falls in that comic book strip sci-fi and have something super successful that we can continue to adapt, and the majority of people are going to latch onto it and be a part of it.
A wise man once said that the beer game is a consumption game, and that you won't survive unless the consumers are consuming your beverage. And that's what you guys have done here with the Anti-Hero. You've kept it fresh, not only with making a quality product, but with all the varietals. You made Citra Hero, Brewed Hero. You keep it fresh for all the consumers. Continues to be your base beer. And that's why Revolution is so popular today.
Well, I would say one of the keys to the success of Revolution is the fact that you guys are willing to change with the times. A lot of breweries, they kind of fall out of favor because they stick with the same formula that they've been doing, because they assume that the people are going to like the same beer all the time. And I think what people have found, what breweries have found, the ones that have gone out of business, is that people's tastes are changing at all levels all the time. And you guys have found a way to, throughout the years, I mean, well over a 10-year period, found a way to stick with what the people are drinking. You guys are going to do some sort of variation, but you're going to do it your own way. And I think that's really the key to Revolution's success.
Yeah, you bet your backside on that. If this was my brewery and I could, as a deity, control the market, we would all drink German Pilsner and nothing else. And that's not a unique standpoint, but we realize that this is a job and we have to contribute to the brewing world, and we're in a great place to do that. So we have to look outside and see what the market wants. We've got to give the people what they want. That's what the revolution is about. It's not about, I'm a revolutionary, I have this one idea, and we're all going to follow this one idea. It's about the people. And when the people change their minds, and they're allowed to change their minds, you can either give the people what they want, or you can stubbornly rest on your laurels and say, no, you loved this last week, why don't you still love it? But the second point you made, the second half of the point you were making was, we are still going to do it like Revolution. We are not going to copy other people. We're too big to copy other people. It's disingenuous. People are going to see that. They're going to recognize it. And even if the liquid is gold, if Revolution is not true to ourselves, it's going to show. And it's, a lot of bad music and bad art has been made by people just copying the times. And we don't want to do that. We want to be open to changing our product line based on what people want to be drinking, but we still want to be Revolution. That liquid has got to be a Jim Seaback or a Will Turner beer, or it's all lost. We have to be true to ourselves, and that's the essence of punk rock. And we're very much a punk rock brewery. And if you're just faking it for sales numbers, it's not going to take too long for the consumer to catch on and realize that we're just blowing smoke up each other's backsides.
So Aaron, you've been a longtime customer and now an employee. You have to have seen this same sort of attitude, this attitude of being able to keep it going, but also keep that revolution mindset. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means everything. The main reason why I came here is to basically echo Marty. It's the punk rock ethos behind the brewery. I knew from day one, you don't open a brewery called Revolution to just fucking sit back and be a regular brewery. You open a brewery called Revolution to cause some shit.
Fuck yeah.
And I knew from day one that this brewery is going to cause some shit in the best way possible. And I, from day one, wanted to be a part of that. But it took a few years before I realized, shit, the majority of America feels the same way. Obviously, by the way that Revolution is growing. And finally, it was that point of oh, I can be a part of this. As somebody who has, a family, I'm gonna dive into that whole thing of ultimately you want to be in a job that you can support your family and you can do what you love, but also support for them. And this was absolutely the company where you could do that. There were enough people that believed in Revolution and were behind it to provide for your family and make super quality beer and be independent, which is something that I've always backed.
I think that says it all. Being able to be independent and also provide. I mean, that's the Revolution in our beat. That's Revolution Brewing, and we've been so thankful for you guys to have us out to be able to sit down, talk with us about all this breaking news, all of these different additions to the Deep Wood series. It's really been a fantastic opportunity. It looks like we are out of beer for the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to come back out maybe next year, talk about the Deep Wood series again. But for now, for me, for Alex,
I'm Jim.
I'm Marty.
Jesus.
Andy here.
Aaron.
And this has been another solid non-fail production.
He said there's no